Good afternoon to all Grade 12 Business Studies teachers in the Free State. I am Liesel Skeepers. I'm a subject advisor from the Taphamafutsanyana district. The broadcast of today will focus on tips for you to use in the classroom during the last few weeks of contact with your Grade 12 learners. The examination will start on the 20th of November for the business studies. It's a 3-hour paper. And that means that we are still left with about 5 weeks and 3 days before the learners are going to sit for the business studies paper. Outcomes of this session. We will have a brief overview of the exam guideline, how to use the guideline, a brief overview of the structure of the question paper, how to answer different questions in section A, B, and C, some study guidelines for the learners to follow, fundamentals which are very important before the learner sits for the exams, constructive engagement of all learners, concept, skills, common problems to focus on, catches in the paper to look out for, this is very important, and some study tips, as well as how to have contact with learners during the day of writing. First, we are going to start with how to use the exam guideline. This is an extract from an exam guideline, and we're going to use it as an example how the teachers and how the learners will make use of the exam guideline. In the first column on your left is stated the LO and the assessment standard. The middle column is the core content to be covered with regard to that specific assessment standard. And the last column, the third column, on your right-hand side, what learners must be able to do, highlighted in red. This is very important. I would also like to mention that it's very important for each learner to have an exam guideline to be able to prepare themselves for the final examination, and also to tick off all the aspects of the content that the learner has already revised. Each teacher must also have an exam guideline, and I'm sure that and hope that all teachers do have one, because this is also a very important document for you to have to plan your lessons. If we look at this example, in the first column, the 12 is for grade 12. Point 3, there with the cursor, is assessments LO3, which is business roles. And the last 3.3 again is assessment standard number 3. This LO of business roles and the assessment standard will be the following. Discuss and debate how professional, responsible, ethical, and effective business practices should be conducted in changing and challenging business environments. The core content to be covered in the middle column, re-examine the meaning of ethical behavior and business practices. Also explore the relationship between ethical and professional behavior. Also, how professional, responsible, ethical, and effective business practices should be conducted. For example, paying fair wages, paying of tax, not starting a business at the expense of anybody else. The last column, what learners must be able to do. This is the specific content which is examinable and which learners must know with regard to the assessment standard, which is in this instance professional and ethical behavior. First of all, the learners must be able to explain ethical and professional behavior in business. Also be able to explore the relationship between them. Learners must be able to apply the King Code of best practices for corporate governance. Learners must be able to apply their knowledge of ethics and to develop a code of ethics for an organization or a business. Learners must also be able to identify and explain unethical behavior. And lastly, learners must be able to explain unethical advertising in South Africa. You will also notice that some of the words were highlighted in red, Those are the action verbs that must be taken knowledge of. This also helps the learner to know what to do. If we look at that last column again, explain ethical behavior. That explains to the learner what to do. Explore the relationship between them. That is between ethics and professionalism. Apply the King Code of Best Practices and apply the knowledge of ethics. Develop a code of ethics for an organization, and then lastly also identify and explain unethical behavior. This can also be done by making use of case studies or scenarios. Question paper. The business studies question paper consists out of 3 sections, section A, B and C. The total of the paper is 300 marks, and the learner must complete the paper within 3 hours. Let's start with section A. In section A, all the questions must be answered. Section A consists of different types of short, objective questions using various assessment styles, covering the content of the year. For example, multiple choice questions can be included, match the columns, choose the correct answer in brackets. 20 questions will be asked, and the mark allocation is 2 marks per question. That brings us to 40 marks in section A, and the learners must complete section A within 30 minutes, half an hour. Section B, the learner should also answer all questions. There will be 3 questions of 60 marks each. That will bring us to a total of 180 marks for section B. Learners should not spend more than 30 minutes per question. That gives us a total of 1.5 hours for section B. These are longer questions, covering the content for the whole year. The answer should be in paragraph style. The questions will be phrased using verbs such as discuss, motivate, compare, differentiate, and explain. In this section, there will also be case studies or scenarios or other source-based resources included, on which questions directly and indirectly will be based. Section C, these are the longer questions, or as we know them, the essay type questions. 4 questions will be set, covering the whole content for the year using scenarios. The learner should answer 2 of the 4 questions. That's very important. There will be 2 questions answered of 40 marks each. That brings us to the total of 80 marks. Learners should not spend more than 30 minutes per question. That gives the learner 1 hour to complete section C. These are your higher cognitive questions, which assess insight and interpretation of theoretical knowledge. Action verbs such as design, plan, appraise, evaluate, recommend will also be included in the instructions for the learners to follow. And the answer should be in paragraph style using headings and subheadings. These questions. We will start with section A. Firstly, we will look at how to answer multiple questions, multiple choice questions. Multiple choice questions, the learners are given a statement, and then there are 4 options to choose from. Options, I will move to the next slide just to show an example. There's a statement and then option A, B, C or D. How to answer these questions? First of all, the learner must try to work out the answer or to find the answer without looking at the possibilities. If that is not possible, learners read through the statement and all the topics, or all the options. Underline the keywords in the statement. Cross out the options that are definitely wrong. Read through the statement again, looking at the key verbs or the key words again, and select the most appropriate option from the options remaining. Then you write down your answer and you move to the next questions. Very important, don't guess your answers. Go back to the questions you were not sure of at the end of the paper if there is time left. This is an example of a multiple choice question. The statement is, the business enterprise has full control over the answer needs to follow. First of all, try to find the correct answer without looking at the options. If that's not possible, read the statement again. Also read the options, market environment number A, macro business environment number B, micro business environment number C, and the marketing function number D. Go back to the statement and underline the key words. The key words in this instance is full control. Because as we know, business has got different degrees of control over different environments. Full control, some measure of control, or no control. Then the learner must cancel the wrong answer, which is definitely wrong. In this instance, it will be number D, the marketing function, because that is not one of their business environments. Then the learner will look at the degree of control again, full control. Number A will be wrong because the market environment, the business just have some degree of control or no control in some instances with regard to the market environment. The macro environment is also wrong because the business has got no control over the macro environment, for example, over government legislation. So the correct answer is number C. The business has got full control over the micro internal environment. This method can be used with the remaining multiple choice questions as well. Then we move on to how to answer match column questions, which is also part of section A. There are two columns. I will just move to the next slide to show you an example. Column A has statements and column B has got different options to choose from to match the statement with the options. Read through the entire list of statements in column A and all the descriptions in column B. Read through each statement individually in column A and find the best match for the statement in column B. Tick off the answers that you have chosen in pencil so that you know which ones have already been chosen. Cross out the options that are definitely wrong. There will be some options or some descriptions that is totally not relevant to the statements. Those must be crossed out. First do the ones you are sure of. Tick off the answers and go back to the ones that you are not sure of and choose an answer from the remaining options. Very important again. Don't guess your answers. Go back to the questions you were not sure of at the end of the paper if there is time left. The example follows. We have column A. We read through column A, number 1 to number 4. The learner then reads through column B, description A up to description G. Then the learner cancels the answers that are definitely wrong. If we look at the questions, number 1, management level that is responsible for operation decisions, we underline keywords. Keywords here are management level and operation decisions. Number 2, deals with employee or employer grievances. Underline the keyword employee or employer grievances. Number 3, the statement number 3, investments that allows a large group of people to pool their capital for investment. And the last one, number 4, ideas that are original and used to solve challenges. If we look at column B, one answer that is definitely wrong, that is not relevant to any of the questions, is number A, green peas. So we cancel green peas. Then we take question number 1. There are 2 possible answers for this question. Number B, lower level, or number F, middle level. Because the statement is looking for the management level, which is responsible for operational decisions. Let's take an example and we say that this learner is not sure about the answer, whether it is B or whether it is F. The learner leaves the answer for later. Statement number 2 deals with employee grievances. There is only one correct answer. Number E, the CCMA. The learner ticks off the answer. The learner writes next to number 2, E. That is the elected option from column B. Statement number 3, or question number 3, investments that allow a large group of people to pool their capital for investments. There are 2 possible answers here. Number C, shares, or number D, unit trusts. Both of these are investments. But we know that shares are when money is invested in shares and shares are sold or bought through a prospectus. So shares are the wrong answer in this instance, and unit trust is where people combine their investments in a pool. A large people put their money together and to obtain a larger return. So the correct answer in this instance is number D, unit trust. We tick it off. And next to number 3, in the learner's answer book, the answer will be D. Number 4, ideas that are original and used to solve challenges. There's only one correct answer in column B, and that is creative thinking. This exercise is complete, but the learner could still not get a correct answer for question 1 because the learner still wants to come back to this question to decide between the lower level or the middle level of management. Then we move over to section B, how to answer longer questions. In section B, we have case studies, we have longer questions, we have data response questions. First, we are going to look at the following, how to answer a longer question. The learner must read through the question, underline the verb like we have done with previous examples, use the fact, explanation and example formula. That means, fact means you write down the fact. Explanation means you go a step further to explain the fact in your own words. Example, give your own practical example that will support your explanation. The learner must underline the key action verb of the question to know what is expected from the question. Does the question want the learner only to recall a fact for 2 marks? Or does the learner need to recall the fact and explain in their own words? In some instances, the learners need to make an explanation and support that explanation with an example. So please also consider this formula, fact, explanation and example, to know what is expected from the question and what your answer should represent. Very important, the last bullet, look at the mark allocation as a guide of how many facts should be included in your answer. In section B, facts are allocated 2 marks per fact and 1 mark for the example. If the mark allocation for question 2.1 is 10 marks, that means that you should give 5 meaningful facts to obtain 10 marks. In other questions where there is an explanation needed as well as an example, those questions will be allocated 3 marks. 2 marks for the explanation, a meaningful explanation, and 1 mark will be allocated for the example that supports the explanation. Then, in section B, we also have to answer case studies. The learners also have to answer case studies. Case studies will be given to the learners. It's a reading part, which will be followed by questions. Some of the questions will be direct questions, other questions will be indirect questions. How to attempt case studies. Look at the heading and the picture to get an idea of what the case study is about, even before you start reading the case study. Then read through the case study carefully and slowly with understanding. Read each question that follows the case study and underline the key verb or the key words. Read the case study again now and keep the questions in mind and underline each of the key words in the case study that is relevant to the questions that was asked. Now answer the question. Pay specific attention to the action verbs or the key words. Again, look at the mark allocation as a guide of how many facts should be included in your answer, as already mentioned with the section B questions in the previous slide. How to answer data response questions. In section B, we also get the data response questions. It can be a whole picture or a cartoon. It can be a graph, or it can be a diagram. What do you see? Look at the picture and get a global idea of what the picture represents, or what the graph or the diagram represents. Look also at the heading and all the pictures to get an idea of the topic. Look again at any other symbols that may be important. Read any text that is provided. Then it might be a diagram showing prices on the one X and showing dates or years on the other X. So take very careful notice of all this information that is provided. Then go to the questions. Read each question and underline the key word or the verb. Go back to your graph, your diagram or your picture again and select the needed information. Keep in mind the questions that was asked. Highlight this information on your graph or diagram or underline it. Then write down the answers. Very important, provide reasons for your answers. These kinds of questions, data response questions, also tests insight. And you have to make motivations and recommendations using your own words. Again, look at the mark allocation as a guide of how many facts should be included in your answer. That brings us to the end of section B questions. Teachers must really practice with learners before they go to the exam room, giving learners case studies, longer questions and data response questions, and use the methods as discussed above so that learners will be able to answer such questions in the final examination. We move over to section C, the essay type questions. This is a very important section of the question paper. Like we said already before during this presentation, learners have to answer 2 essay type questions of 40 marks each. That brings us to a total of 80 marks. That makes it very important that learners should not neglect the essay type questions. Where possible, I can also recommend that learners start with essay questions while they are still fresh. That will definitely not be wrong. Or the learners might start with section A just to ease themselves and then move over to the essay type questions. And keep in mind also that the learner should not spend more than half an hour on the essay type question, on one essay type question, and a full hour on the 2 essay type questions combined. Then the learner must unpack the question by underlining the different instructions. In section C, scenarios are given to the learners for the essay type questions. Within this scenario is then followed by the instruction of what the learner should do. In the question there is more than one instruction within that sentence or 2 sentences. So it's very important to unpack the question and underline the different instructions of all 4 essay type questions. Then only choose the 2 essays to answers. Learners do make the mistake by just looking at a keyword and then choosing an essay to answer without unpacking the instructions carefully. And then when they are answering the question, there are some aspects of the question that they don't know how to answer. Plan your essay first. This is done by making use of a mind map. Now we will also look at mind map as a study method later on during this session. So I'm not going to say too much on that now. The essay consists of 3 parts: the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. We start with the introduction to the essay. The learner should start with the word introduction as a heading and underline introduction. That's very important, because by doing so, the learner can already obtain marks for the structure or the layout of the essay. What is the introduction? It defines the goal of your essay so that the reader will know what you want to achieve in the end. The learner should not use the question as phrased in the paper and repeat it as the introduction. By doing so, the learner will forfeit marks because it will be a repetition of the question itself. The learner should give at least 3 meaningful facts, because the mark allocation is 1 mark per fact. And that brings us to a total of 3 marks for the introduction itself. Then we get to the body of the essay question. Break up the information into logical parts and discuss each part in its own paragraph. Again, I'm referring to the mind map and to the unpacking of the question so that the different instructions will be clear to the learner. Make use of headings and subheadings to the paragraphs. This is very important because headings itself is allocated 2 marks in most instances, and then the facts that falls underneath the headings will also be allocated 2 marks per full fact. Use examples to justify your statements. This is also very important because in the inside there is a section of originality which will be allocated for real-life examples. The maximum marks obtained for the body of the essay question will be 32 marks. Hints and tips, if we go to the left-hand side, this is very important tips to give to your learners. Don't repeat facts. That's very important. Don't repeat the same fact in the introduction, in the body, and in the conclusion, because learners will only obtain marks for the first time that a fact was mentioned. If the same fact is mentioned again, no marks will be obtained because it will be a repetition of the fact. Get to the point and don't use unnecessarily long sentences. Wherever it's possible, also make use of bullets and try to keep to the point. Also very important, put your statements in context of the question that was asked. Then the conclusion part of the essay, again very important. Start with the word conclusion as a heading. Underline it. Briefly summarize the main points and focus of the essay. If you were asked to make a recommendation or to give your own opinion, that can form part of your conclusion. End your essay with a meaningful fact, not repeating what was said in the introduction or what was said in the body. That brings us to the end of the essay type questions, and I really hope that teachers will also go back to the classroom and practice essays with the learners again. Highlight these aspects with your learners so that they will also go very well prepared into the exam room, and also highlight to all learners to answer 2 essay type questions and not only to answer 1 and forfeit 40 marks as a result of that. The inside part of the question. The body part adds to a total of 32 marks. The insight is 8 marks. The other 8 marks come from insight. Even if the learner has chosen or attempted the topic wrongly, the learner can still score marks for the insight of the question. Underneath insight we get layout for 2 marks, analysis for 2 marks, synthesis for 2 marks, and originality for 2 marks. Let's look at each of these individually. In the layout, what is expected for 2 marks? The learner should put the introduction, underline the introduction, and write 3 meaningful sentences. There should be a body with headings and subheadings and paragraphs, and there should be a conclusion underlined with a meaningful fact written under the conclusion. If all these elements are available in the essay, the learner will score 2 marks. Analysis. This is the learner's ability to break down the question to show understanding of what is being asked. I have already said during this presentation that learners should unpack the question and write down the different instructions. These different instructions will become headings and subheadings. And that will also help the marker to see whether the learner was able to break down the question and to show understanding of what has been asked. Synthesis. This is the parts to the question that should be included in the answer. It also means that synthesis means to break down information and to put it together again. A combination of relevant points. If this combination of points are there, the learner will score 2 marks. If all the relevant points are not there, the learner will only score 1 of the 2 marks. Originality. It was stated with the body as well that facts must be supported by examples, real-life examples where possible. Originality marks are given for examples, recency of information, current trends and developments. This brings us to some study guidelines. When learners prepare themselves, when learners are busy with revision, preparing themselves for the examination, there are methods to use to make your learning easier. Business studies is a content subject with a lot of topics and information to be studied. I can recommend that the following methods are used, the mind maps as well as the tables, to make study easier. Let's look at mind maps first. Mind maps is an excellent tool to revise your work and to learn in a visual way. How is a mind map drawn? First of all, the topic that you are going to revise will be selected. You can also refer to the exam guideline and the assessment standard. If we take this example, the topic is trade unions. Draw a circle in the middle of your page with the key idea or the topic. In this instance, the topic to be studied or revised is trade unions. Place key concepts evenly around the circle. If we look at the example, what does the learner need to know with regard to trade unions? The learner needs to know the roles of the trade union. The learner needs to know the functions of the trade unions, the history of trade unions, good labor practices, as well as the grievance procedures. These elements should be placed evenly, or concepts should be placed evenly around the topic in the middle, the trade unions. Draw lines to connect the topic and the keywords. List headings and subheadings. These concepts will become headings, and then the information with regard to the concepts will be filled in underneath each heading, making use of keywords. So there will be roles underneath the roles of trade unions. 5 or 6 keywords can be mentioned, and the learners must be able to make sentences of these keywords. The same with the functions. 5 or 6 functions should be known. Keywords can be written down as part of the mind map, and the learner will phrase full, meaningful sentences from the keywords. The same with good labour practices and the grievance procedures. And a definition of the history or an explanation of the history of trade unions should also be known. Mind maps is also a very effective tool to use to plan your essay type questions. If we can just quickly go back to the essay type question part, under the first bullet, break up information into logical parts and discuss each part in its own paragraph. There we refer to the mind map. Another useful method to study large amounts of information is tables. Especially with content, for example, like the forms of ownerships that can be directly compared with one another. Decide your categories. If you look at the example, the categories are partnerships, close corporations, and company. Identify the criteria under each heading. The criteria in this example is who share the profits with regard to these different forms of ownerships, the number of members for each of these forms of ownerships, and continuity, whether there is continuity in the different forms of ownerships. Draw a grid with enough columns and rows needed. Start with each heading individually and fill in the information. Or you can start with the criteria. You can work horizontally or vertically to complete the table. If we work horizontally, who shares the profit? In partnership, it's the partners. In a CC, it's the members. In the company, it's the shareholders. If we go to the next criteria, the number of owners or members. In a partnership, 2 to 20 partners forms a partnership. A close corporation, 1 to 10 members is needed. And a company, 1 or more. 1 to 50 for the public company, private company, and 1 to unlimited for the public company. Continuity in the partnership, there's no continuity. The partnership is dissolved when one of the members die. In a close corporation, as well as in a company, there is continuity because these are legal entities. Fundamentals for learners to know for the final examination. Very important, unpack the question that is asked. This was already mentioned when we were looking at the essay type questions. Underline the action verb such as outline, analyze, evaluate, apply, calculate, etc. Know your keywords. Learners should know their keywords to all the different topics. There are 12 topics in business studies. And keywords should be identified to make learning easier. The next one is also very important. Know your formulas. That is for the business calculations. Know all the formulas. Formulas will not be given to you like it is done in maths literacy. The business studies learners must know the formulas and show all the workings. If your final calculation is wrong, you will not obtain the maximum marks, but you can still obtain part marks for correct formulas and correct calculations that was shown. Know all your acts. That's very important. Questions on acts will be there based on in section A questions as well as section B questions as well as section C questions. The SWOT analysis, the PESEL from the microenvironment, the Porter's 5 forces and the balance scorecards must be applied as models to evaluate the extent of control over the different business environments. These are fundamentals that should be known by all grade 12 learners. Next, we are going to look at the constructive engagement for you as the teacher for the next few weeks before the learners leave school. What can you do in the classroom constructively to prepare the learners for the examination? Method 1. Make extracts of questions from previous question papers. Engage these learners with questions in the form of short class tests. Learners will answer the questions, they swap their answers, and they do peer assessment under the supervision of the teacher. Focus on challenging content as identified in the question analysis of June and trial exams. Discuss any common problems that may have emerged before you move on to other questions or other topics. Make sure that all common problems and all difficulties was addressed, and that each and every learner understand how and where their mistakes were made. Method 2. You can also make use of quiz in the classroom, and learners really enjoy business quizzes because all learners will be actively involved, and there will be winners in the end that can be awarded. Conduct a quiz where learners work in groups of 5 to 6 learners. This method is very useful to practice Section A questions because it will take the format of a multiple choice questions and answers and possibilities. Give the groups the same question. If you have different groups, all groups will be given the same question. That can be done by making use of a data projector, giving photocopies to the learners with questions, or writing the questions on the board. Give just enough time to answer the questions. When time is up, get answers from the group leaders. They will be writing the correct answer on a piece of paper and record the answers on the chalkboard in a table. Discuss the solutions in detail. This is very important because some groups might have the answer right, other groups might have the answer wrong. So the solution must be discussed and explained in detail to iron out all mistakes made by some of the groups. Then supply the next question or problem and repeat the process. The total scores of each group at the end of the period will be added together, and you can award the winners, whichever manner you prefer to do so. There is an example of the scoreboard. First of all, this is the question or the problem as stated to the learners. Calculate the gross monthly salary of a qualified electrician who earns 300,000 annually. The solution, 300,000 per year annually will be divided by 12 months, and the monthly salary will be 25,000. The example of the scoreboard. Group 1. This is just an example to illustrate to you how the scoreboard works. Group 1 had the answer wrong because they expressed the answer as a percentage, 25%, instead of in rands. The unit was wrong as well as the answer in general. Group 2 also had the answer wrong. Their answer was 2,500. They made some calculation mistakes with regard to decimals. Group 3 had the answer correct, 25,000. Group 4 had the answer wrong. They made use of the annual salary instead of the monthly salary. And Group 5 also had the answer correct. You will continue with other questions and stating the answers of each group and adding the totals in the end. And I can assure you that learners really participate actively in such an activity in the classroom. Concepts and skills that must receive special attention in business studies. Teachers should consult the exam guideline to cover all the different content which can be included in the question paper. Learners must also make use of the exam guideline to tick off all the content that they have revised or prepared themselves for before they enter the exam room for the final examination. Learners should be given practical examples of different types of questions. This can be done by making use of previous question papers. Additional notes should be given to learners where the textbooks are lacking content. We do have some of the textbooks that was printed earlier from 2011, 2012, which might lack some content with regards to kind of strategies, the King's Codes, but additional notes was given to teachers, and teachers must share these notes with the learners. Learners must be given more background information on aspects such as interest rates and investments. These are topics that can also be used as an assignment or a project or a research task, where learners can be sent to financial institutions to gain more information with regard to interest rates and investments, and this can be shared with the rest of the class. Focus on common mistakes. There are some common mistakes that appeared in most of the previous question papers, or that learners struggle with. Terms such as impact and implication should be explained to the learners in context to the question that was asked. Impact and implication means that there will be a positive outcome or a negative outcome, or both a positive or a negative outcome is expected, but it should be seen in context or answered in context with the question that was phrased. Teachers should make use of such terms in their revision for learners to gain understanding of these terms. Make use again of previous question papers where such terms were included in some of the questions, especially in section B as well as section C questions. Learners must be guided in writing full sentences. This is very important. Full marks can only be obtained if full sentences or meaningful sentences was written. If the learner represents a vague answer, the learner will not obtain 2 marks, but instead of obtaining 2 marks, the learner will only obtain 1 mark. For example, the learner should not write, "Trade union protects workers." That is a vague answer. The learner should present a full, meaningful fact. Trade unions protect workers against unfair treatment or exploitation. That is a meaningful fact which is worth 2 marks. Another common mistake, learners lack knowledge. Learners really need in-depth knowledge of all the topics, of all the 12 topics, to be able to answer essay type questions for 40 marks. Study tips. These are some study tips that you must please share with your learners, and you must also assist the learners with regard to the following. Help the learners to prepare a study timetable. The learners should allow themselves enough time over the period of the 4 weeks remaining. There are actually 5 weeks remaining from today, but that leaves us with 1 week to wrap up and to spend time on aspects that need special attention. During these 4 weeks, learners should focus on at least 3 to 4 topics per week. Organize the learners' study buddies, or the learners can organize themselves a study buddy. That will enable the learners to assist one another on difficult concepts and skills. You can pair the weaker learners with stronger learners, and the weaker learners will really benefit from that. You can even prepare stronger learners with one another, and that will also assist the learners and will enable them to have quality results on higher levels 6 and 7. Make use of various previous question papers while you study a topic and test yourself. This was said repeatedly in this presentation. Make use of previous question papers. Choose a topic from the question analysis that learners struggled with in June or September exam. Choose that topic and refer to different question papers, Section B and Section C questions. This will enable you to know how the topic can be asked differently in Section B and Section C questions. Extra resources. Apart from the textbook, there are some extra resources used as a strategy to improve the results for business studies in 2013. The first one is the ICTI's broadcasts. There will be 9 content lessons from the 8th until the 19th of November, addressing different content. These will be 2-hour sessions, broadcast sessions that the learners can watch, and this will also be very meaningful to the teachers as well as the learners, especially to the learners. Head for Success study guides. Each and every learner has a Head for Success study guide. The study guides are very complete, covering all the topics, and there is no information lacking from these study guides. 3-in-1 series was given to the learners during 2011-2012, and these study guides can also still be used since they have some question papers and memorandum that learners can make use of during their revision for the final examination. Mindset notes was also given to teachers during teacher development sessions. These notes can also be shared with the learners. Previous question papers and memos are freely available. They were distributed to teachers. They are also available on different websites from the DOE as well as from the Free State DOE. On the day of writing, please don't neglect your learners. Try to be there at the exam room just before they enter so that you can wish them well and you can wish them luck. Be calm yourself and ease their nerves. If possible, put a short note of encouragement on each learner's desk, and they will really do their best for you. And very important, keep them in your prayers. In conclusion, all of the strategies and plans that was mentioned during this presentation require careful planning from your side for it to be implemented successfully. Good luck for the last stretch. Only 5 weeks to go, 3 days left. Remember, plan your work and then work your plan. Thank you very much.